The Formula One team budget cap for 2021 will now be $145 million. That's $30 million down from the cap originally proposed in the pre-COVID era. That's great news for the lesser Formula One teams that could and can only dream about the 250 million or 300 million budgets of the larger teams, and who by implication therefore believe that money buys success. But what does it mean actually for the wealthier teams? The first thing to remember is that the Formula One technical regulation changes for 2021 are relatively minor. Less aero on the cars via the banning of selected scoops, ducts and holes. A 3 kilo overall car weight increase to a whopping 752 kilos, plus stronger, heavier and more deg-sensitive Pirelli tyres. That adds up on paper to a loss of about a second a lap on most circuits, but the cars will basically be and look the same, livery changes aside of course. So one of the big questions is whether or not the budget cap for 2021 will in any way cramp the style of the big teams and therefore even up the grid a little bit. I think it's unlikely. As one leading Formula One engineer put it to me, it'll take about 10 years to unwind the current technical development system. In other words, the teams that are doing the winning, Mercedes and Red Bull, have evolved amazingly complex design and development embedded software systems that won't be going anywhere, budget cap or not. About the biggest impact will be if a choice has to be made between doing a part in a very expensive material or perhaps a more perfunctory one. And that sort of choice is becoming increasingly redundant due to the ever-increasing minimum weight limit of the cars. As impressive as the cost cap sounds, with its gliding path downwards for the next 3 years, the major teams can still spend big if they want to in a number of areas outside the cap. Let's add them up. Motorhomes, running them and transporting them from race to European race. Let's not go into Red Bull territory here because we know they take, 30 articulated lorries for AlphaTauri and Red Bull energy centres all around Europe. Let's just look on a figure of about, $5 million per team for the motorhome budget for the year. I think that's fair. And we might as well have a show of hands as well, I think, here for the teams that took their test team motorhomes to the European Grand Prix in 2020 in the COVID year, rather than the more lavish 2019 Emporia. Let's hope that continues too. Marketing stuff. We know from Zach Brown's interviews with this channel that McLaren's headcount for their marketing division is 100 people. So that's approximately another $5 million. Each team is also strangely, well not strangely I guess if you think about it, allowed 3, let's call them fat cats that can be paid outside the budget cap. They're the top 3 guys of each company. Even many of the key players of some of the teams at the back of the grid travel first class and spend big. So let's call this number for an average around $6 million. I think that makes sense per team. Then there's drivers. If you're Mercedes and you've got Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas and a third driver, you're looking at $70-80 million a year for the driver salaries. If you're Williams, you're either making money on the deal or breaking even. Again, let's take a conservative average and call it 30 million. That's much less than Mercedes, of course, but let's call it 30. And that conservative total adds up to $46 million a year on top of the 145, if the team can spend 145, and if it wants to spend the additional 46. And here you got to say that at Mercedes, Red Bull and Ferrari, it's going to be a lot more than that additional 46 we've averaged out for the rest of the teams. And to put that number into context, it is 4 times larger than the total decrease between 2021 and 2023 on the glide path of the budget cap. 4 times larger in 1 year. What does all that add up to? Well, first, a bad day for the engineers. The further strangling of any sort of technical creativity on the cars with proprietary parts coming into play is one thing. Much more significant, I think, is the inability of engineers in future to earn really big money. Sure, your Adrian Newey's and your James Allisons are probably one of the 3 fat cats at Mercedes and Red Bull. I hope they are anyway. And Mattia Binotto is, of course, team principal at Ferrari. He was nothing but an engineer. Guys like James Key, though, or Andy Green are probably not fat cats. And that means that their salaries are pretty much locked down until they, jump ship and go somewhere else to join a team as a fat cat. That's kind of draconian elitist by any standard, particularly as engineers are, for sure, the backbone of any team's success in Formula One. If you're going to restrict earning power, and that's a very debatable concept in the first place, then do it for all, not just for some. It reminds me actually of the start of the 1982 season when Carlos Reutemann was trying to negotiate a new salary with Frank Williams, and Frank was saying that the team was really in trouble financially and they're going to have to reduce costs everywhere and everything was a problem and he couldn't meet Carlos's demands. So Carlos said, absolutely no problem at all, Frank. I will drive for nothing, providing you and Patrick also pay yourself nothing. Of course, Carlos then got the deal. A decent engineer could now also argue that everything is now doubly restrictive. If we have the budget cap, and I think this time around the forensic auditing will be beyond reproach, why not then free up aero and chassis development? Wouldn't that make things more interesting in Formula One, a category of racing that still prides itself on a DNA which is the pinnacle of motorsport, the pinnacle of automotive engineering? And here's another irony. For Formula One to become sustainable and zero carbon, a massive amount of additional money is going to have to be spent. And that money, as we can see from the new ginormous 23 race calendar, assuming it goes ahead as planned at the moment, will come from race promoters, TV rights and sponsorship. Simply put, the more they race, the more money they make. Yet the more they travel around the world, and that includes Europe of course, the bigger the carbon trail. In 2020, 3 circuits staged 2 doubleheader races. Good for carbon footprint, good for travel cost reductions, but at present, no same circuit doubleheaders are planned for 2021. Why? Because no race promoter is going to continue to spend that sort of money. Those doubleheaders happened in Austria, Silverstone and Bahrain in 2020 because Liberty underwrote the costs, and they had to do that because above all, they needed a championship in that COVID year. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of good things about the cost cap when you unscrew the top. The biggest, in my view, is that Formula One's credibility will go up massively on Wall Street and amongst bank managers around the world. Cost caps sound good, sound rational, and that, in turn, will assist the next generation of Formula One team owners. The Premers, the ARTs, the Dams, the Carlins, the High-Techs, any of the teams or other new blood that might want to fill the remaining 3 places on a Formula One grid. Now they have something to sell. They have a spending limit. It sounds good. It makes sense. Encouraging new blood into Formula One, though, is probably the last thing the current Formula One midfield incumbents had in mind when they were pushing for cost cuts and a more equitable spread of prize money. Their vision was, and still is presumably, to beat the teams in front, to spend less money, and to become very rich in the process. And to make sure through that wealth and strength that no young punk new teams jumped the fence and took their place. So I guess the best way to end this video is to say to those teams, to the midfield teams currently in Formula One, be careful for what you wish.